Thomas Weir carried the coal up 4 flights because Lord Edmund had ordered the servants' lift chained shut. Not for any reason of thrift. For sport. The boy carried the scuttle on his shoulder, one hand steadying it, the black dust settling into the creases of his knuckles, and he did not flinch. He did not answer back. He climbed, and he set the fire, and he went down again for the next load. That was the morning. By evening it was worse. Lord Edmund took a silver tray heaped with cold ash from the grate and emptied it over the hearth Thomas had just blacked and polished. He did it slowly, watching the boy's face the whole time. 11 dinner guests sat at the long table. Every one of them saw it. And Edmund brushed the last of the ash from the tray with 2 fingers and said, "Clean it twice, boy, your kind was bred for the floor." The guests laughed, not all of them, but enough, and Thomas Weir knelt down on the stone and began again, and said nothing, because there was nothing a footman could say that would not cost him his place. Now hold that picture, and take it across the village to a low door at the back of the church, where an old woman named Bess Callow stood with a basket of wet linen against her hip. She had been a midwife once. She had brought half the parish into the world with her own 2 hands. And when Thomas passed her in the lane that week and turned his head, and the light fell on his face for the first time, she dropped the basket. The linen spilled into the mud. Her mouth moved, and what came out was barely a breath. "It can't be," she said. "Not after 19 years." She did not explain. She could not. She only stood there, an old woman going white in the face, looking at a footman she had never met and knew better than anyone alive. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this find you where you need them, subscribe so the next one does too. And do one thing for me. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, from the coast to the mountains to the little places nobody names. Tell me where you are. Now, let me take you back to how it began, because to understand what Bess Callow saw in that lane, you have to understand a night 19 years before, in a great cold house on the Yorkshire moor called Thornbury Hall. It was the hard middle of winter, the kind of winter that kills lambs in the field and old men in their beds. Snow had shut the roads for a week, and in the high blue bedroom on the 2nd floor, Lady Margaret, Duchess of Thornbury, was giving birth. It was not an easy birth. Bess Callow was there, young and strong then, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. The doctor came from Mardenhoe on a borrowed horse and near froze on the way, and by the small hours, by the light of too many candles, Lady Margaret did a thing that surprised everyone in the room. She bore 2 sons, twins, born within the same hour, one crying strong, the second quieter but breathing, both of them small and red and perfect. Bess washed them. She wrapped them. She laid them in the same cradle, side by side, because there was only the one cradle prepared. Nobody had expected 2, and the Duke, Augustus Halstead, stood in the doorway and looked at his 2 sons, and, for one moment of his hard and honourable life, he wept. That was the last happy hour that house would have for a long time, because in the black middle of the following night, when the candles had burned down, and the household slept, and the snow still fell against the glass, one of the 2 cradles was empty. The second child was gone. What happened after, the Duke never let anyone speak of again. There was a search. There were servants questioned and turned away, and a night nurse who could not be found by morning. And by the 3rd day the Duke came down the great stair with his face set like carved stone and told the household the thing they were to believe and never to question for the rest of their lives. The second child had died, weak from the start, taken by the cold. There would be one grave, and no name upon it, and no more talk of it, ever. The word twin was not to be spoken in Thornbury Hall again. Not by the fire, not in the kitchens. not in prayer. Lady Margaret was told her second son had died at her breast. She was not shown a body. She was not permitted to sit up. And she never fully believed it, not in the deep silent part of her that a mother keeps, but her husband forbade the subject with such cold finality that she learned to fold the grief away and carry it. The way you carry a stone in your coat that you have stopped noticing but never once set down. The one child who remained they named Edmund. And Edmund grew up the only son, the heir, the whole future of the house resting on his one small back. And he was raised to know it. Now bring it forward. All the way forward, 19 years, to the autumn our story truly begins. Thornbury Hall was not what it had been. The moor was the same, and the great grey face of the house was the same, but inside the money was running out like water from a cracked jug. The Duke did not speak of it. A duke does not. But the good silver had thinned. The stables held fewer horses, and every quarter a letter came from a banking house in the city, coreless and vain, that the Duke read alone in his study and burned before anyone could ask. They needed staff, all the same. A great house must be seen to run like a great house, whatever the truth beneath. And so that autumn they took on a new second footman, hired up from Mardenhoe on the word of the vicar, a young man of 19 with a workhouse behind him and no family anyone could name. Thomas Weir. He came up the servants' road on foot with everything he owned in a single canvas bag. He was tall and quiet, and he had a way of standing very still that some found unsettling and the older servants found restful. He learned the house in a week. He learned which stairs creaked and which door stuck in the damp, and how the Duchess took her morning chocolate, and where the good candles were kept from the bad. He did his work exactly, and he did not complain, and he was kind to the scullery girls in a way that cost him nothing and meant everything to them, because the scullery girls were kind to by no one. He was, in short, the sort of servant a great house barely sees. And that suited Thomas. He had learned young that being unseen was a kind of safety. There was one thing he carried that was his own. When he had left the Marden workhouse district, the woman who raised him, a laundress named Nan Weir, all red hands and hard love, had pressed a small object into his palm at the gate and closed his fingers over it. "The only thing you came wrapped in," she'd said. "You keep that. It's yours by rights, whatever else isn't." It was a small carved robin, wooden, no bigger than the top joint of his thumb, worn smooth by handling, its red breast long since faded to the colour of old brick. A cheap thing, a whittled thing, the kind a countryman might make by the fire on a winter night. Thomas kept it in the inside pocket of his coat, over his heart, and he touched it sometimes without knowing he did it, the way you touch a scar. He thought nothing of it. It was just the thing he had always had. He did not know it was a question. He did not know it had a twin. For the first weeks, all was quiet. Thomas served and slept and rose in the dark and served again, and the great house closed over him like water over a dropped stone. And then, in the middle of that autumn, the heir came home. Lord Edmund Halstead came back from his tutors in the south, and the house changed the way a pond changes when something heavy is thrown in. He was 19 too, the same age as the new footman, though no one would have thought to set them side by side. Edmund was polished where Thomas was plain. He wore his clothes like a man who had never once wondered where the next set would come from. He was quick and clever and vain, and he had been told since before he could walk that he was the finest thing this ancient house had produced, and he believed it the way you believe the ground is solid. And from almost the first day, Edmund fixed on the new footman. He could not have told you why. If you had asked him, and no one would have dared, he would have said the boy was insolent, that there was something in the way he stood, in the way he met your eye a half-second too long before he lowered it, that wanted correcting. But that was not the truth of it. The truth was that something in Thomas Weir's face troubled Edmund at a level below thought, like a word on the tip of the tongue that will not come, and a man like Edmund does not sit with a discomfort he cannot name. He hunts it. He tries to stamp it out. So he began. The chained lift was the first of it. The servants' lift, a small platform on ropes that ran from the cellars to the top floor and saved a man 40 stairs a day, Edmund ordered chained and padlocked, and gave the key to no one. Good exercise, he said, for idle hands. And so the coal went up on shoulders now, and the ash came down on shoulders, 4 flights each way, and it was Thomas most often sent to do it, because Edmund, when he was home, made sure of it. Then came the ash over the hearth. You have already seen that one. 11 guests, and the silver tray, and your kind was bread for the floor, and the laughter, and Thomas on his knees on the cold stone, starting the work again. But understand, that was not one night. That was the shape of many nights. The particular cruelty of it was the audience. Edmund never troubled to torment the boy in private. Private cruelty is for men who are ashamed. Edmund wanted witnesses. He wanted the county to see him put the low thing in its low place, because a young lord proves his height by how far below him he can make another man stand. There was the matter of the wages, too. A guest reported a fine scratch on a silver salver, a hair's width, likely there for years. Edmund had it laid at Thomas's door, a month's wages docked for damage to the family plate. Thomas had not touched that salver. Everyone in the servants' hall knew he had not. He said nothing. He took the loss, and that hurt him more than the coal or the ash, because that money was not his to lose. Every quarter he sent the greater part of his wages back to Nan Weir in Mardenhoe, the woman who had fed him from her own thin table when the parish would not, and a month gone was a month she went without, and she would never say a word of it, and that was the wound. He wrote to her that the work was steady and the master fair. He lied to her in every letter so she would sleep. That was the kind of thing Thomas Weir did. The other servants watched all this with the helpless anger of people who cannot afford anger. The old butler, Mr. Finch, muttered into his pantry that no good came of a young master with nothing to do but be cruel. The cook slipped Thomas an extra portion when Edmund had been at him. The scullery girls, whom Thomas had never once spoken sharp to, hated Lord Edmund with the pure clean hatred of the young. But no one could do anything. It was the heir's house, or would be. You do not stand between the heir and his sport if you want a roof. And Thomas, this is the thing to understand about Thomas, Thomas did not fight it, but he did not break under it either. He did not go sullen. He did not spit in the soup or slack the work or scheme small revenges the way a lesser man would have, and been right to. He simply endured with a straight back and a quiet face, and did each task exactly, and touched the little robin in his coat when it was very bad, and carried on. There was a dignity in it that unsettled Edmund more than any answering back could have done. You cannot win against a man who will not play. And Edmund, without understanding it, hated him more for that too. Now, while all this was happening inside the walls of Thornbury Hall, out in the village something else had begun. Bess Callow had seen his face. You remember the lane, the dropped basket, the old woman gone white. That was the beginning of it, but it did not end there. Bess was old now, past 70, a washerwoman in a cottage by the churchyard, her midwife days long behind her. Her hands shook, her eyes were not what they were. But there are some things a woman does not forget, and one of them is a face she washed clean in candlelight on the night it was born. She began to watch for him. On market days she would find a reason to be near the Hall's road. When the Thornbury servants came down for the Saturday buying, she would stand at her gate with her heart going like a hare's, waiting to see the tall, quiet one. And each time she saw him her certainty grew, and with it her fear, because Bess Callow was carrying a thing she had carried for 19 years. And the sight of Thomas Weir was pulling it up out of the deep water where she had sunk it. She noticed things a stranger would miss. She noticed that the boy was left-handed. He carried, he reached, he set things down with his left. And Bess, who had stood in a certain nursery long ago and watched a certain other young man grow up at a distance across pews and market squares, knew that Lord Edmund Halstead was left-handed too. A small thing, twins are not always alike in it. But it went into her, and it stayed. She noticed the way he tilted his head when someone spoke to him, a little to the side, chin dropped, listening with his whole face. She had seen the young lord do the exact same thing, once, at the church door, listening to the vicar. The very same tilt. And her old heart had turned over. These were things the household could not see, because the household never set the two young men side by side and looked. Why would they? A footman and a lord do not stand together to be compared. But you, watching this, you already know. You knew from the first minute. That is the terrible sweetness of it. You can see the whole shape of the thing, and not one of them can, and you have to watch them walk toward it in the dark. The autumn deepened into winter. The snow came down on the moor the way it had come down 19 years before, and the roads shut, and the great house drew in on itself. And two things happened in that hard white season that began to turn the story. The first was that the offences reached their peak, not in private this time, in front of the whole county. The Duke held his hunt breakfast in the new year, as the Halsteads had held it for 100 years, and though the money was gone and the letters from Corliss and Vane came thicker, the breakfast went on, because the breakfast was the family's face to the county, and the Duke would sooner have starved than let the face slip. The gentry came from 30 miles. The hall was full of red coats and cold air, and the smell of horses and hot punch, and the servants moved through it all with trays held high, and Thomas among them. I do not fully know what set Edmund off that morning. Perhaps the crowd. Perhaps the drink. Perhaps only that the thing in Thomas's face troubled him worse than ever, with so many eyes to prove his mastery to. But as Thomas passed with a tray of glasses, Edmund stepped into his path, and Thomas, to keep the glasses from falling, looked up. He met the young lord's eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough. "You forget yourself," Edmund said, loud, so the nearest guests turned. "You look at me." And he struck Thomas across the face with the back of his hand. The blow rocked the boy's head. The glasses swayed on the tray and, by some small miracle of steady hands, did not fall. A red mark rose on Thomas's cheek, and the hall went quiet in a ring around them, the way a crowd goes quiet, half in shock and half in appetite. "You'll never be anything in this house but what you are," Edmund said into that silence, his voice carrying to every corner. "Nothing, born of nothing." And Thomas Weir stood there with his lord's handprint rising on his face and the whole county watching, and he did not answer. He did not lower the tray and walk out, though every muscle in him must have wanted to. He did not weep, or beg, or curse. He set his jaw and steadied the glasses, and after a long moment he bowed his head, not in shame, but in the small controlled way a man bows when he has decided that the other man is not worth the ruin of his own restraint, and he stepped around Edmund and carried the tray on. It was the finest thing anyone in that room had seen a servant do, and most of them were too busy laughing to see it, but not everyone laughed. And here is the moment, here is the hinge. The Duchess, Lady Margaret, was crossing the far end of the hall as it happened. She had come down late, as she often did, and she was passing behind the crowd when her son's voice rang out. She stopped. She looked, and for one instant, one single instant, she saw the two of them together, her son Edmund, flushed and cruel and beautiful, and the footman an arm's length before him, straight-backed. Marked, unbowed, two young faces at the same height, in the same cold morning light, an arm's length apart. And something happened in Lady Margaret's chest that she could not name. Her heart stopped and then lurched, and her hand went to the wall for support. She stood there, swaying with a strange terror rising in her, a grief with no cause, a recognition of nothing, and she could not for her life have told you what had struck her. She only knew that looking at those two faces so close together had opened a door in her that she had spent 19 years nailing shut. Then the crowd shifted, and the footman moved on, and the moment closed. And Lady Margaret pressed her hand to her breast and told herself it was the heat of the room, and did not believe it, and said nothing, because she had learned long ago to say nothing. That was the first of the two things. The second happened out in the village, and it was quieter, and it changed everything. Thomas had leave, once that winter, to go down to Mardenhoe and see the woman who raised him. He walked the frozen road with his coat buttoned to the throat and the little robin in his pocket. And he came to Nan Weir's narrow house by the tannery, and she opened the door and looked at his face. The bruise had faded, but she was a mother of the kind that is made, not born, and she saw straight through him. "Who hit you?" she said. "Not a question. No one, Nan. I walked into a door. You walked into a door." She let him in and shut it against the cold and fed him, because that was what she had, and when he was warm and the lie had been let lie, she sat across from him with her red ruined hands around a cup, and she looked at him a long time. "You still have it?" she asked. "The robin?" He took it out and set it on the table between them. The little faded bird. Nan looked at it, and something moved behind her eyes. "I never told you the whole of it," she said, "about how you came to me." Thomas waited. He had learned to wait. "You were left at the workhouse gate," Nan said, "in the deep of winter, 19 years back this coming month. A baby not 2 days old, near froze, wrapped in a good linen cloth, too good, that cloth, better than any workhouse child ever came in, and that little bird tucked in beside you. I was laundress there. I took you because no one else would, and because," she stopped, "because you looked at me. 2 days old, and you looked at me like you knew me. And I never let you go." "Why tell me now?" Thomas said. "Because there was talk," Nan said, "years back. I never repeated it, because talk gets folk killed and children taken, and I'd have died before I let anything take you back to wherever you came from. But there was talk, Thomas, of a great house up on the moor, and a child that went missing from it the same winter you came to my gate. A child the quality said was dead and buried, and some said wasn't. She reached across and put one red hand over the little robin, hiding it. I never knew if it was you. I never wanted it to be you. A great house is no kindness to a child, whatever the storybooks say. So I held my tongue, and I raised you mine. But you're a man now, and the road's yours, and I'll not go to my grave with a thing kept from you that was yours to know." Thomas sat very still. Outside the wind came off the moor and worried at the door. "A great house on the moor," he said. "I never named it," Nan said quickly. "I don't know it. It's only talk. Likely nothing." But her eyes said otherwise, and Thomas saw it, and for the first time in his life the little wooden bird in his hand felt heavy. He did not run to the hall and make wild claims. That was not Thomas. He thought of Thornbury, up on its grey ridge above the moor, the great house he served in, and he thought a great house on the moor, and he felt the two facts touch each other in his mind like two cold hands, and then he deliberately, carefully set them apart again. Because a workhouse child who lets himself dream of being the son of a duke is a child who will be broken on the wheel of it. He had learned not to want what he could not have. He had made a whole life out of not wanting, and so he thanked Nan and pocketed the robin and told himself it was nothing, a coincidence, an old woman's talk. And he walked back up the frozen road to a house where the air struck him for meeting his eyes. But the seed was in the ground now, and you know what grew from it, even if he did not. Now understand what Thomas decided in that season, because it is the heart of who he is. He was near the end of his tether at Thornbury. Any man would have been. The slap at the hunt breakfast had gone round the county. The docked wages had gnawed his pride. The whole household expected him to give notice any day, and no one would have blamed him. Edmund plainly wanted him gone, and would only escalate until he went. Thomas thought about it on the long walk back, and he decided he would not leave. Not out of pride, and not to spite Edmund, and not because some part of him had begun to wonder about a great house on the moor. He told himself it was none of those. He had taken a place for the half-year. He had shaken the vicar's hand on it and given his word, and a man who has nothing else in the world still has his word, and Thomas Weir would finish his half-year honestly and leave with a clean name, and be able to say he had never once given them cause. He would not be driven out. He would simply outlast it, the way he had outlasted everything, with a straight back and a shut mouth. He would not scheme, he would not fight. He would endure with dignity, because dignity was the one thing they could not dock from his wages or empty over his hearth. That was Thomas's decision, made on a frozen road in the dark, and it was the making of everything that came after. Because a man who stays is a man who is there when the truth arrives, and the truth was moving now. Quietly, in the village, an old woman was making up her mind. Bess Callow had watched Thomas Weir through the whole of that hard winter, and her certainty had become a stone she could not swallow. She was 71, she had a cough that shook the cottage windows, and she had begun to be afraid, in the deep cold nights, not of dying, but of dying with her secret still in her, unspoken, useless, a wrong she had helped to do and never once tried to undo. Because Bess knew more than the household knew. Bess had been in that nursery 19 years ago. Bess had seen a thing that night that she had told no one, out of fear for her own neck, and had carried like a coal in the chest ever since. She had watched a night nurse, a woman she'd half known, do a thing in the dark hours that Bess had been too frightened to stop and too honest to forget. And there was more. There was a thing Bess had done herself, in the days after, half out of guilt and half out of some instinct she could not explain, a thing she had kept hidden in the one place no one would look. In her Bible. Bess Callow kept a great old family Bible, black leather gone soft with handling, that had been her mother's and her mother's before, and pressed flat between two of its pages, hidden 19 years, was a single leaf of paper. Torn old water marked at one corner. It had come from the parish register, from the christening book of the church down the lane, and it was written over in the fine old hand of a vicar long since dead, and it recorded the births and christenings of a certain dark winter, in the proper order. By the clock, every child brought to the font that season, named and dated, and set down forever in the order they were born. Bess had torn that leaf out and hidden it because she had known even then, frightened as she was, that a day might come when the truth of that winter would need a witness that could not be silenced or paid off, or told to hold its tongue. A dead vicar's ink does not lie and cannot be bribed. She had not known what she meant to do with it. She had only known she could not let it be destroyed. And now, watching a left-handed footman tilt his head in the market square, she knew. She rose one grey morning near the end of that winter, when the first cracks of thaw were coming to the moor, and she took down the black Bible, and with her shaking old hands she opened it to the place, and she drew out the torn leaf of the christening record, and she held it up to the weak light from the window. 2 names, 2 sons, christened at the same cold dawn 19 years ago, set down in the order they were born. And the first of them, the elder, by the record's own reckoning of the hour, was the one the great house on the moor had buried under a stone with no name. Bess Callow sat down slowly in her one chair, with the leaf trembling in her fingers, and the old cough took her, and when it passed she wiped her eyes, and she said aloud to the empty cottage, in a cracked and frightened and finally decided voice, 19 years. God forgive me. 19 years I've sat on it. No more. She folded the leaf and she wrapped it in a clean rag, and she put it inside her dress against her heart, and she began, with the slowness of the very old, to make herself ready to walk up the moor road to Thornbury Hall. She did not know, as she tied her bonnet with shaking hands, that up at the hall a letter had just come from the city, from a banking house called Corliss and Vane, that the Duke was reading alone in his study with a face like grey stone. She did not know that the letter named a sum, £14,000, and a deadline, 60 days, and that unless it was met the whole of Thornbury, the house and the moor and the name would be sold out from under the family before the year turned. She did not know that the Duke, desperate to secure the succession before the bank could take it, had that very morning sent word to the family solicitor to bring up the old parish records. The very records Bess carried a torn page of against her heart, so that the entailed trust might be examined, and the heir's claim made ironclad, before Corliss and Vane could move. She did not know that everything was about to arrive at once. She only knew what she carried, and what she had seen, and the face of a footman in the market square. She pulled her shawl tight, and she stepped out into the thawing cold, and she set her old feet on the road that climbed up the moor toward the great grey house, where a young man carried coal up 4 flights of stairs and touched a little wooden robin over his heart, and did not yet know his own name. And behind her, on the mantel, her black Bible lay open to the empty place where the truth had waited 19 years, and had, at last, decided to walk up the hill. The fire came on a Tuesday night, and it began, as most of Edmund's ruin began, with a game. He had brought 2 of his tutor friends up from the city. They were drunk on the Duke's claret, and bored, and boredom in a young lord is a dangerous thing. Near midnight they took lanterns out into the box hedge maze. There was a wager in it, who could reach the stone fountain at the heart of the maze fastest, in the dark, with the lantern shuttered. Edmund led, laughing, and somewhere in the third turning of the green he set his lantern down on the gravel to catch his breath, and he kicked it over without seeing, and the oil ran out under the hedge. The box was old. It was winter dry at the root, and the wind that night came off the moor cold and steady. The little flame found the dry underside of the hedge, and it climbed. Thomas heard it from the servants' passage. He had been sent to bank the fires in the east rooms, and he came to the window with a scuttle of coal in his hand. And he saw the orange light moving low in the maze, where no light should be. Then he heard the shouting. The 2 friends had run clear. Edmund had not. He had turned the wrong way at the fountain, and the fire had closed the path behind him, and he was in the green heart of the maze, with smoke pouring up around his boots. Thomas set the scuttle down. He did not call for help. There was no time in it for calling. He went out through the garden door and into the smoke. It was black in there, and it stung the eyes, and the box crackled like something eating. He went low. He had carried coal up 4 flights of that house 100 times, and he knew how to move in a dark that pressed on you. He found Edmund by the sound of him coughing, on his knees at the fountain, one arm up over his face. Thomas got him under the arms. He got him up. He did not speak to him. He turned him toward the one gap in the hedge that still showed clear, and he pushed him through it, and he came out after him into the cold, clean air, with his own coat smoking at the shoulder. Edmund lay on the frost and heaved for breath. The 2 friends stood back, useless, and in that moment the grooms came running with buckets, and the light of the burning hedge fell full on the 2 young men, side by side on the ground. One of the grooms, an old man named Peck, stopped dead with his bucket swinging. For a moment he could not tell which was the lord. They were the same dark head, the same set of the shoulder, the same jaw, one sooted and one pale, but the same. Peck blinked, and the moment passed, and he threw his water on the flames. But he did not forget it. Servants do not forget a thing like that. Thomas got to his feet. His hands were burned along the left palm, and his coat was ruined, and he had breathed enough smoke to make his chest a fist. He did not wait for thanks. There would be none, and he knew there would be none. He turned and walked back to the house, and he went to his cold little room under the roof, and he sat on the edge of his bed and took the carved robin out of his coat pocket and held it in his blistered hand until the shaking stopped. Edmund never said one word to him about it. Not thank you, not a nod. By morning the story around the servants' table was that the young lord had got himself clear, and Thomas let it stand, because he asked nothing and never had. But the housekeeper had seen his burned hands at breakfast. Her name was Mrs. Diggory, and she was a hard woman with a soft place kept well hidden, and she made him come to her room after the morning work so she could dress the burns properly. She peeled the ruined coat off his shoulder. She reached for the shirt beneath to see if the fire had caught the skin there too, and she went still. On the flat of his left shoulder blade there was a mark, a birthmark, the colour of dark claret, shaped something like a leaf or a small closed hand. Mrs. Diggory stood with the cloth halfway to it and did not move for the length of 3 breaths. She had seen that mark before, 19 years before, on the back of a newborn boy in the great nursery in a hard winter when she had been a young under-nurse and had helped bathe the Duchess's living son before the world was told the other one had died. "Where did you come by this?" she said, and her voice was not her own. "I've always had it," Thomas said, "since I was small. Nan says I was born with it." "Nan," said Mrs. Diggory. "Who is Nan?" "The woman who raised me, in the Marden workhouse district. She was laundress there." He said it plainly. He was not ashamed of it. "I was a foundling, Mrs., left at the workhouse gate 2 days old. There's no shame I know of in it." Mrs. Diggory sat down slowly in her chair. She looked at him a long time. She did not finish dressing the burn. "Go back to your work," she said at last. "Say nothing of this to anyone. Do you hear me?" Nothing. And Thomas, who was good at saying nothing, went. That same afternoon a carriage came up the moor road, black and glossy, and out of it stepped a man in a grey coat with a leather case under his arm. His name was Harrow. He was the land agent for the banking house of Corliss and Vane, and he had come to call the note. The Duke received him in the study, alone, and shut the door. But servants hear through doors, and by evening the shape of it was known below stairs. £14,000. 60 days. The whole of Thornbury, the house, the moor, the name, to be sold out from under the family before the year turned, unless the Duke could find money he did not have. "He'll not do it," said Mr. Finch, the old butler, over the servants' supper. Corliss and Vane, city men, no more feeling in them than a ledger has. He set down his fork. "This house has stood 100 years, and it'll be pulled apart by a man with a leather case." Thomas said nothing. He ate his supper. He did not know that the ruin of the great house and the truth of his own blood were, that very night, the same story wearing 2 coats. Because up in the study, when Harrow had gone, the Duke sat with the mortgage note in one hand and, in the other, an old letter he had written that morning to the family solicitor. He needed the succession made iron before the bank could move. If the entail could be examined, if Edmund's claim could be locked past all challenge, then perhaps there was a marriage to be made, money to be married in, the debt to be met. But the entailed trust could not be touched without the parish records. The christening register, the old book from the church at Mardenhoe, he had sent for it that morning. He did not know that a torn leaf of that very book was, at that hour, coming up the moor road inside an old woman's dress, held against her heart. Bess Callow reached the servants' door of Thornbury Hall as the light was failing. She had walked 30 miles of hill in the cold, with the slowness of 71 years, and she was near done. She knocked, and Mrs. Diggory opened, and the 2 old women looked at one another, and something passed between them without a word, because Mrs. Diggory had spent all that day thinking of a birthmark, and Bess Callow had spent 19 years thinking of a christening, and each saw in the other's face that the same thing had come round at last. "You'd best come in," said Mrs. Diggory. There's things wanting saying in this house tonight, but things do not always get said in the order we wish them. For while Bess sat by the servants' fire, warming her dead hands, Mrs. Diggory went up to the Duchess. Lady Margaret was in her sitting room. She had never been strong since the hard winter 19 years ago. She had been told her second child was born dead, and had never quite believed the shape of the grief they gave her, and had obeyed her husband's rule that the word twin was never spoken in the house. She had grown quiet over the years, and pale, and given to sitting long at the window, looking at the moor. Mrs. Diggory came in and stood before her, and could not, at first, find the way to begin. "My lady," she said. "The new footman. The young man, Thomas. I have seen him," said the Duchess. And then, because she was honest even in her own weakness, she added, "I could not tell you why, but I cannot look at him. My heart stops when he passes. I have thought I was going mad." "You are not mad, my lady." Mrs. Diggory knelt down by her chair. Her voice shook now, this hard woman. "I dressed a burn on his shoulder this morning. He has a mark on him, a claret mark, like a leaf, on the left shoulder blade." She took the Duchess's cold hand. "I helped bathe your son the day he was born, my lady. Your living son. He had that mark. In the same place, to the very shape of it." The Duchess did not scream, she did not weep, she simply stopped, as a clock stops. Her eyes went very wide, and then they went far away, and she slid sideways in the chair in a dead faint, and Mrs. Diggory caught her before she struck the floor. When they had brought her round, and given her water, and she could speak again, she said only one thing, over and over, in a whisper, to the ceiling. "I bore 2 marked children. I bore 2. They told me one was dead. I bore 2. The whole house heard of it by full dark. You cannot keep a thing like that from a house. The scullery girls heard it, and the grooms heard it. Old Peck, who had for one instant been unable to tell which young man was the lord, and Mr. Finch heard it, and set down the wine he was decanting, and did not pick it up again. The Duke heard it last, because he was the one they were all afraid to tell. He came down the great stair like a man walking to a gallows, and he went into the room where the Duchess lay, and he shut the door on the servants. What passed between the Duke and Duchess that night no one heard whole, but raised voices came through the oak, hers, which no one had heard raised in 19 years, and his, low and broken. And then the Duke came out, grey to the lips, and said, "Fetch me the old woman, the washerwoman at the fire." Now, they brought Bess Callow up to the great drawing-room, where the fire was lit and the family portraits looked down from the walls, generations of Halsteads, with the same dark head and the same set jaw. Bess stood in the middle of that grand cold room in her walking boots and her patched shawl, 71 years old, and she was not afraid, because she had done being afraid 19 years ago, and had had a long time since to make her peace with this hour. The Duke stood by the mantel. The Duchess sat, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes fixed on the old midwife, and Bess told it. "I was the midwife the night your sons were born, Your Grace," she said. "Both your sons, for there were 2. I know there were 2, for I caught them both in these 2 hands." She held them up. There was a hard labour, and a hard winter, and a great deal of blood, and the Duchess near died of it. But the children lived, both of them. 2 boys, and the elder born a good quarter hour before the second, and both of them marked here. She touched her own left shoulder with a wine-coloured mark. "For the mark runs in blood, Your Grace, as you would know if you had ever looked at your own grandmother's portrait, which hangs, I see, on that wall." The Duke turned and looked at the portrait behind him. A woman in an old-fashioned gown, painted 100 years back, with her hair up and her shoulder bare. And there, faint under the varnish, the painter had set down what he saw, a small claret mark on the left shoulder blade. The Duke made a sound like a man struck. "There was a nurse that night," Bess went on, "a night nurse, brought in for the lying in. I never trusted the look of her. And in the dark hours, when the house slept and the Duchess lay near death and could not count her own children. That nurse took the elder born out of the cradle. There was talk after, talk I could never prove, that she was paid to do it. Paid by a cousin of this family, a jealous man long dead now, who stood to gain if the line failed. She carried the child down the servants' stair and out of the house, and she was gone by morning, and never seen in this county again. And the child, said the Duke. His voice was barely a voice. Wrapped in good linen, said Bess, with a little carved robin tucked in beside him, one of a pair, for I saw the pair of them in the Duchess's own keepsake box the day before. 2 robins, carved by the old Duke for his coming grandchildren. She carried him 30 miles across the moor, and left him at the workhouse gate in the Marden district. 2 days old. And in the morning they told you, your grace, that your second son was born dead, and you buried an empty grave, and you forbade the word twin ever to be spoken, because grief and shame together are a lock that keeps a mouth shut. She lowered her hands, and I let it be locked. God forgive me. I was young, and I was afraid of the family, and I told myself the child was surely dead in the workhouse within the year, as the workhouse children mostly are, and no good would come of speaking. 19 years I have carried that. It is a stone I have carried uphill every day of my life. You have no proof of any of this, said a voice from the doorway. It is the raving of an old woman who wants coin. It was Edmund. He had come down, drawn by the noise in his own house, and he stood in the door in his fine coat with his colour high, and he looked at the washerwoman with the contempt he kept for everyone below him. I have proof, said Bess Callow, and she reached into her dress, against her heart, and she drew out the rag, and unwrapped it, and held up the torn leaf of the christening register. The page she had torn from the parish book 19 years ago, and kept, because even young and afraid she had known that one day the truth might need a witness with paper in her hand. The vicar christened both boys that same cold dawn, she said, before the second was 2 hours old, for we feared the Duchess would die, and wished the children blessed. He wrote them both in the book, in the order of the clock, as is the law, the elder first. And then, when the child was found gone, and the family said he had died, the vicar, being an honest man and troubled, wrote against the elder's name only the one word, lost, not dead. Lost, for he would not write a lie in God's book. She held the leaf higher. It is all here. 2 sons. The elder born marked as lost. And that elder born, your grace, is the young man who has this half-year carried your coal up 4 flights of stairs because your younger son ordered the lift chained shut for sport. The room was very quiet. The Duke crossed to her and took the leaf from her hand as though it might burn him. He read it. His eyes went along the vicar's faded writing, and his face, which had been grey, went the colour of ash. He read the 2 names. He read the word lost. He read the date and the order of the clock, and he understood all at once and 19 years too late, that he had grieved a living son and had raised the younger boy as heir over the elder, and had never once counted the cradles. And here, for a moment, the Duke of Thornbury did a terrible thing in his own heart. He looked at that torn leaf, and he thought of the bank, and the £14,000, and the 60 days, and the whole weight of 100 years of Thornbury coming down. And he thought, if this leaf were in the fire, the succession stays clean. Edmund marries money, the debt is met. The house stands. 1 page. 1 old woman who can be paid to be silent. 1 footman who has never in his life been given anything and would not know how to ask. He turned toward the fire with the leaf in his hand. Augustus, the Duchess, was on her feet. She had not stood so straight in 19 years. If you put that in the fire, she said, you will burn what is left of me with it. I have mourned a son who was never dead. You will not make me mourn him twice to save a house of stone. Give it to me. The Duke stood with his hand out toward the flames, and the whole of his rigid, honour-bound life stood in the balance of it, and then his hand fell. He turned from the fire, he gave the leaf to his wife, and he sat down heavily in a chair and put his face in his hands and the Duke of Thornbury wept, which none of them had ever seen, and would none of them ever forget. "Send for the solicitor," he said, muffled into his hands, "and send for the county. Whatever there is to be faced, we will face it in the open. I have kept one thing in the dark for 19 years, and it has nearly cost me my soul and my son both. No more darkness. Bring it into the light, and let it be seen." It was 3 days before it was done, for these things move by law and by paper, and the solicitor had to be fetched from the city, and the parish book itself brought up from Mardenhoe to lie beside Bess's torn leaf and be matched. Torn edge to torn edge, so that no man could say the page was forged. Word went out across the county. And on the 3rd day the long gallery of Thornbury Hall, filled with the same gentry who had, half a year before, sat at the hunt breakfast and watched Lord Edmund strike a footman across the face and laugh. They did not laugh now. Thomas was brought up from below. He did not know, until that morning, the whole of it. Mrs. Diggory had told him a little, and Bess had told him a little more, but he stood in the door of the long gallery in his footman's black, with his burned hand still bound, and he did not fully believe it could be about him until the Duke turned and looked at him across that whole grand room full of the great people of the county, and could not speak. The solicitor spread the parish register open on the long table where the light fell. He set Bess's torn leaf against the torn stub still in the book. They fit. Every eye saw them fit. He laid his finger on the page. "2 sons," he read aloud, into the silence, "christened at Mardenhoe Church on the same dawn, 19 years ago this coming month, recorded in the order of their birth, as the law requires." His finger moved. The elder. And beside his name, in the vicar's hand, the single word, "lost." His finger moved again. The younger. Edmund Augustus Halstead. A sound went round the gallery like wind through corn. Bess Callow stood up, small and straight, and swore her testimony on the black leather Bible from her own cottage mantle, brought up the hill for the purpose, and she told it all again before the county, in a shaking voice, and not one soul in that room doubted her, for the truth has a plainness that the county gentry, who had heard a great many polished lies in their time, knew when it stood before them in patched boots. Then Mrs. Diggory came forward and bared the truth of the birthmark, and the Duchess opened her keepsake box that had sat locked 19 years and took out a small carved wooden robin and held it up. And Thomas, hardly knowing he did it, reached into his coat over his heart and drew out its twin, the one he had carried every day of his life, the only thing he had come wrapped in. And the 2 little birds lay side by side in the light on the long table, carved by the same hand, 1 bird for each grandson, and they were the same to the last stroke of the knife. The Duke came and stood before Thomas. He was an old man now, older than he had been 3 days before. He looked at the young man's face, which was his own son's face, which was his own grandmother's blood come round again, and he opened his mouth to say the name that was written in the book, the true name, the elder-born name. And he could not finish it. He got the first of it out, and his voice broke on it, and he could not say the rest. So he did instead the only thing left to him. He took Thomas's bound and burned hand in both of his own, before the whole of the county, and he bowed his head over it. There was not a dry eye in the long gallery, and these were not soft people. The Duchess crossed the room. She did not hurry. She came to Thomas, and she lifted her hand and laid it against his face, against the cheek that Edmund had struck. And she looked at him the way a woman looks who has been given back across 19 years a thing she was told was buried, and she said, "I knew. My heart knew. Every time you passed me it stopped. And I thought I was mad, and it was only that I knew." And Edmund stood at the side of the room and heard the whole of it. He heard the register read. He heard the birthmark sworn. He saw the 2 robins lie side by side. He watched his mother cross the room to the footman and touch his face. And he understood, slowly, the way a man understands a thing he has fought with his whole strength not to understand, that the young man he had ordered to carry coal up 4 flights, the young man over whose freshly blacked hearth he had emptied a tray of ash, the young man he had struck before the county and called nothing born of nothing, was his own brother, his elder brother, the true-born heir of Thornbury. Born a quarter hour before him, into the title Edmund had spent 19 years believing was his by right of blood. The colour went out of his face. His own words came back on him in that grand room where he had spoken them. Your kind was bred for the floor, nothing born of nothing. He had said them to his elder brother, the firstborn, the rightful lord, while he himself was the younger, the one who, but for a paid nurse and a dark winter's night, would have been the footman carrying the coal. He said into the silence the only thing he could find. "It cannot be." "It is," said the Duke, and he turned to his younger son, and his voice was dry and level now, all the weeping done. "Blood told, Edmund. Every day it stood in front of you in a black coat, and you could not read it. You would not look. Blood told, and you would not listen to it." Edmund had no answer. For once in his life the quick, cruel tongue had nothing, and Thomas, who through all of it had stood exactly where a footman stands, at the edge, hands folded, waiting, Thomas at last stepped forward. But not to claim, not to crow. He had never in his life schemed for a thing, and he did not begin now, with the whole county watching and the title falling into his hands. He said, "I ask only 2 things." His voice was quiet, and the great room leaned to hear it. Bess Callow carried the truth uphill for 19 years, and blames herself for the silence. I'll not have her blamed. She is to be pardoned of it, wholly, and kept in comfort the rest of her days. And Nan Weir, the laundress in the Marden district, who took in a 2-day-old workhouse child that no one wanted, and raised him honest and gave him the only kindness he knew, she is to be brought to this house and kept here, in warmth, for life. He looked round at them all. For myself I ask nothing. I was worth something as a footman, or I was worth nothing as a lord, and which of those is true does not change with a page in a book. Let it be those 2 women looked after. That is all I want of any of it. And it was that, more than the birthmark, more than the register, more than the robins, that the county remembered. That when the whole of Thornbury fell into his hands, he asked first for the old washerwoman and the old laundress, and nothing at all for himself. They had watched him take the ashtray on his knees without a word. They had watched him take the slap without lifting his hand. And now they watched him take the dukedom the same way, without grasping. He had proved his worth long before he was proved his birth, and the county knew the difference, having seen a great deal of birth without worth in its time. There remained the matter of the £14,000, for the house was still in debt, and Harrow of Corliss and Vane still had his note, and 60 days still ran against them. And it was the solicitor, going through the old church papers that same afternoon, who found the second half of the miracle. When the elder son had been christened 19 years before, a marriage portion had been settled on him under the entail, as was done for the firstborn of Thornbury in every generation, a trust held in the keeping of the church to come to the elder son on his coming of age or his marriage. When the child was declared lost, the trust had not been dissolved. It could not be, under the terms, until the child was proven dead, and the child had never been proven dead. The honest vicar had written lost, not dead, and so the trust had sat in the church's keeping for 19 years, quietly gathering, untouched, waiting for an elder son who never came. Until now, it came, with its 19 years of gathering, to something more than the £14,000 owed to Corliss and Vane. Harrow was still in the district. He came up to the hall on the appointed day to press his advantage, leather case under his arm, expecting a broken family and a forced sale. He was shown into the long gallery where the Duke sat, and beside him the newly proven elder son, and the solicitor with his papers. "Your Grace," Harrow began, "I regret that business is business, and the 60 days the debt is discharged, Mr. Harrow," said the solicitor, and laid the church draft before him on the table. "In full. Today, you may count it." Harrow counted it. His face did a number of things. He had come to take a house, and instead he was handed the whole of what he was owed, down to the last shilling, drawn on a trust older than his own banking house, unlocked by the same torn page that had unlocked everything else. There was nothing left for him to do. A debt paid is a debt paid, and a land agent cannot foreclose on a family that has just handed him his money in full. He closed his case. He bowed, stiffly, to the Duke, and to the young man beside him, whom he did not yet know how to address. And he was turned from the door of Thornbury, with the debt discharged and the house standing, and the moor and the name safe another 100 years, because the truth of one footman's birth had, in the end, paid twice. It was a year before the box hedge grew back green over the burned place in the maze, and a year is time enough for a great many things to settle. Bess Callow died that winter, at peace, in a warm bed in the village, with a fire kept for her, and coin enough, and her conscience finally laid down. They buried her in the churchyard at Mardenhoe, and at the head of her grave, in place of the usual stone angel, the family set a small carved robin, cut by the same old craft, so that the woman who had carried the truth of the robins uphill for 19 years should rest under the sign of it. Thomas saw to it himself. Nan Weir took her tea each morning in the morning room of Thornbury Hall, in a good chair by the window, a laundress from the workhouse district who had raised a duke's heir on soap and honest kindness, and if she found it strange to be waited on, she never let it spoil her enjoyment of the view. And Thomas, styled now by his christened name, the name the Duke had not been able to finish in the long gallery, though he had learned in time to say it steadily, Thomas walked the estate he had once served, and did not change so very much for the changing of his coat. On an early summer morning you might find him on the servants' stair, showing a new scullery boy the coal route up the 4 flights, gently, teaching him the trick of the turnings, the same route his younger brother had once ordered chained shut for sport. The lift ran freely now. Thomas had seen to the chain the first week. Edmund had not been ruined. In the end, only reordered by the plain clock of his own birth, a quarter hour on the wrong side of a title. He was not cast out. Thomas would not have it. Instead, the younger brother was set to learn the estate as its agent, to work the land he had thought he owned, under the elder brother he had struck across the face before the county. He did it stiffly at first, and then less stiffly, for work has a way of wearing the arrogance off a man that no lecture ever could. On the day he left the house to take up his rooms at the estate office, Edmund stopped at the gate where his brother stood. He looked at Thomas a long moment, at the face that was his own face, the head that tilted to listen the way his own tilted, the same blood come round the other way, and he said the only true thing he had, one dry line, quiet, meant for no one but the two of them. "I looked at you every day," he said, "and never once saw my own face." Then he went on down the road to his work, and Thomas watched him go, and did not answer, because some things do not need answering, and he had always been good at that. That is the whole of it. What is stolen at birth is not the same as what is lost. Lost things wander home, stolen things wait, patient, keeping their own quiet ledger until the day the account comes due and every entry is paid. The coal carried, the ash swept twice, the slap taken in silence, the man walked into the fire for who never said thank you. 19 years the truth sat on a cottage mantel in a black leather Bible, open to the empty place. And then it tied its bonnet with shaking hands, and set its old feet on the road, and walked up the hill, and arrived, as truth does, exactly on time. If a story ever made you believe that the truth can wait 19 years and still arrive on time, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd like to see how far this one travels.